I did not always know that my name was a lie. For most of my life, I believed it the same way a child believes the sky will always be there. I never questioned it. I never doubted it. A name is the first thing we learn about ourselves. It is the sound we answer to, the word that pulls us out of sleep, the word written on our school papers, our letters, our future. Mine was given to me carefully. Lovingly, I thought, but quietly, another pause, as it turned into page. It was also given to hide something. I learned the truth very late in life. So late that I had already lived most of my story without knowing the first chapter was wrong. The night I found out, the house was still. Not peaceful, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when everyone is gone, and the walls no longer hold voices. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same one I had eaten at since childhood. The same scratches on the wood. The same chair that always leaned a little. To the left. In front of me was a stack of old papers. Things no one wanted anymore. Things people leave behind because they think they no longer matter. I did not know that among those papers was the truth about who I really was. Before that night, I thought I knew my life. I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew myself. I was wrong. I grew up in a quiet house. Not an unhappy one, just quiet. My mother woke early every morning. She moved softly, like she did not want to disturb the air. She cooked. She cleaned. She smiled when I walked into the room. My father spoke little. He worked long hours and came home tired. He would sit in his chair, close his eyes, and rest his hands on his knees. They were good to me. I want to say that clearly. They never hurt me. They never raised their voices. They never made me feel unwanted. But love is not only what is given. It is also what is shared. And there were things they never shared with me. I was their only child. At least, that is what I was told. I did not have siblings to fight with or secrets to whisper to at night. It was always just the three of us. Sometimes, when I was very young, I would watch my parents when they thought I was not looking. There were moments when my mother's face would soften in a strange way. Moments when my father would look away quickly if I asked certain questions. I did not know what I was seeing. I just felt it. Children feel things long before they understand them. My name was spoken often in our house. My mother used it gently. My father used it carefully. At school, teachers called it out loud. Friends shouted it across the playground. I learned to write it neatly, at the top of every page. It felt like mine. I answered to it without thinking. But sometimes, when my mother said my name, there was a pause, just a small one. So small that most people would never notice. I noticed. It was as if she needed a second to remember which version of the truth she was living in. When I asked her where my name came from, she smiled and said, "It was a name I always liked." That was the end of the conversation. There were no stories about my birth. No funny memories about the hospital. No photos of my mother holding me for the first time. If I asked, my father would clear his throat. My mother would say, "Those were busy days." And then, we would talk about something else. Over time, I learned not to ask. As I grew older, I became very good at being quiet too. I learned to observe instead of question. I learned to accept instead of push. I did well in school. I helped around the house. I tried to be easy to love. I think part of me believed that if I behaved well enough, I would earn something I could not name. Belonging, maybe. Certainty. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie in bed and wonder why I felt slightly out of place in my own life. It was not loneliness. It was something softer. Something harder to explain. Like wearing shoes that fit, but never quite feel comfortable. When I became an adult, I left home with mixed feelings. I was excited, but I was also relieved. I built my own life. I married. I worked. I became busy in the way adults do. My parents grew older. They visited sometimes. They were proud in quiet ways. Still, the distance never fully closed. After my father passed away, my mother changed. She became smaller somehow, quieter than before. I moved closer to help her. I cooked her meals. I sat with her in the evenings. Sometimes, she would look at me for a long time. Her eyes would fill with tears, and she would say, "I wanted to protect you." I thought she meant from the world. I would squeeze her hand and say, "I'm fine, Mama." She would nod, but she did not look relieved. When she passed, the house felt empty in a way I had never felt before. Not just empty of people, empty of answers. I stayed behind to sort through her things. Drawers, closets, boxes no one had opened in years. Grief makes time strange. Some days passed too quickly. Others barely moved. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table again. The same table from my childhood. The same leaning chair. I opened a box filled with papers, letters, forms, documents. Most of it meant nothing to me, until I found the envelope. It was old, thin, my mother's handwriting on the front. I stared at it for a long time. I had seen it before, many times, but something told me that now was the time. Opened it slowly. Inside was a birth certificate. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. The date was right. The place was right. But the name was not. I read it again and again. My heart began to beat faster. I told myself there must be a mistake. Then I saw another paper. And another. Adoption records. Legal forms. Letters written in a careful, worried hand. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. My hands started to shake. The name on my birth certificate was not the name I had lived with. It belonged to someone else. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand why. I learned that my mother was not my biological mother. She was my aunt. Her younger sister had given birth to me. She was young, unmarried, afraid. In those days, fear made decisions for families. They decided it would be better if I grew up with a different name, a different story. They decided silence was safer than truth. They decided for me. I sat there for a long time, the kitchen light humming softly above me. The papers spread out like pieces of a life rearranged. I did not cry right away. I felt something deeper than tears. I felt the ground shift under everything I thought I knew. My name was not just a word anymore. It was a wall, a shield, a secret. And suddenly, so many things made sense. The pauses, the silence, the distance. I was not imagining it. I never was. That night, I folded the papers carefully. I put them back into the envelope. I did not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing my name in my head. The old one, the real one. It sounded unfamiliar, but it also sounded honest, and I knew then that my life was about to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Forever. After that night, nothing looked the same. The house was the same. The furniture was the same. But I was not. I moved through the rooms slowly, as if the walls were listening. Every photograph felt different now. Every memory carried a second meaning. I kept thinking about my mother. The woman I had called Mama all my life. The woman who raised me, fed me, worried over me. She was not my birth mother, but she was still my mother in every way that mattered. Knowing that made the truth harder, not easier. I did not feel anger right away. I felt confusion. Then grief. Then a quiet sadness that settled deep in my chest. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Why did they think I could not handle the truth? I started reading the letters again. Slowly this time. Carefully. They were written years ago. When I was just a baby. The paper smelled old. The ink had faded. Another letter was from my father, the man who raised me. He wrote about responsibility, about protecting the family, about keeping things simple. Simple, I learned, often means silent. As a child, I used to wonder why some relatives treated me differently, why certain family gatherings felt awkward. Now I understood. I was the only one living a story that was carefully edited. Birthdays. About all the moments when people looked at me with something like pity or guilt. I had mistaken it for kindness. Days passed. Then weeks. I carried the truth quietly. I did not tell anyone right away. I needed time to sit with it, to let it settle. Some mornings I would wake up and forget for a moment. Then it would rush back to me all at once. My name, not mine. I practiced saying my real name in my head. I tried to imagine being called by it. It felt like trying on someone else's coat. Warm, but unfamiliar. I visited my childhood home again. I walked through my old bedroom. The walls were bare now. The floor creaked the same way it always had. I sat on the bed and thought about the little child I used to be. So trusting, so unaware. I wondered how my life might have been different if I had known the truth earlier. Would I have been braver? More confident? More whole? Or would it have broken me? That question haunted me. One afternoon, I decided to visit my biological mother's grave. I had avoided it until then. I did not know how to stand there. As a stranger? As a daughter? The cemetery was quiet. The air smelled like rain. I found her name carved into stone. My heart ached. I knelt down and placed my hand on the ground. I'm here. I whispered. I did not know what else to say. Standing there, I realized something important. She did not abandon me. She gave me up because she believed it was love. My aunt did not steal me. She raised me because she believed it was love. And my father stayed silent because he believed it was love too. Everyone was trying to do the right thing. They just did it the wrong way. End. That understanding softened something inside me, but it did not erase the pain. I still felt like part of my identity had been taken from me. Not stolen, hidden. There's a difference. Eventually, I told my spouse. We sat at the kitchen table late at night. I spoke slowly, carefully. They listened without interrupting. When I finished, they reached for my hand and said, "You are still the same person." I nodded. But inside, I knew something had shifted. I was the same, but I was also different. I began to notice how often we define ourselves by names, on forms, on introductions, on legal papers. A name is how the world recognizes you. And I had been recognized under false words. That realization made me feel small, and angry, and lost, but also curious. Who was I beneath the name? At night, I dreamed of doors. Doors opening, doors closing. I dreamed of calling out and not knowing which name to use. I woke up tired. One evening, I took out a notebook. I wrote my given name on one page, my real name on another. I stared at them both. I realized I did not have to erase one to accept the other. Both names had shaped me, one through truth, one through love. As the days went on, I started to feel something new. Not anger, not grief, a quiet determination. I could not change the past, but I could decide how to carry it. I could let the truth break me, or I could let it teach me. I knew I needed to tell my children next. They deserved honesty, but I also knew it would not be easy. Because when you change your story, you change theirs too. And that is never simple. I waited for the right moment. Not a big moment, just a calm one. Because this story did not need drama. It needed care. I did not tell my children right away. Not because I wanted to hide the truth from them, but because I needed to understand it myself first. Truth is not something you throw at people. It is something you place gently in their hands. For days I rehearsed the words in my head. I tried to make them simple. I tried to make them soft. But no matter how I arranged them, they felt heavy. Names carry weight. And I was about to tell my children that the name they had known me by was not the one I was born with. That changes things, even if no one wants it to. I chose a quiet evening. No phones, no noise. We sat around the dining table, the same table where we had shared so many meals, where homework had been done, where stories had been told. I took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. They looked up, concerned but calm. I told them, slowly, from the beginning, about the papers, about the letters, about the name. I watched their faces as I spoke. Confusion, surprise, then silence. One of them asked, "Does this change who you are?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "But it changes how I understand myself." They nodded. They listened. They accepted. Children often handle truth better than adults. They have not learned yet how to be afraid of it. After that night, I felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. Still, the truth had started to work its way into every corner of my life. I began to question memories. Moments I once understood one way now looked different. Family gatherings, side glances, long pauses. I saw them all clearly now. I reached out to extended family. Not everyone, just one person. An older cousin, someone who had always been kind, but distant. We spoke on the phone. There was a long pause when I told them what I had learned. Then they sighed. "We didn't know how to tell you," they said. That sentence stayed with me. Not that they didn't tell me, but that they didn't know how. Fear, I realized, had shaped my entire childhood. As weeks passed, the emotional weight grew heavier. Not because of anger, but because of unanswered questions. Who would I have been if I had grown up with my real name? Would I have felt more confident, more certain? Or would it have made no difference at all? These questions do not have answers, but they still ask themselves. I started to feel split inside. Two names, two stories. The name I was raised with, and the name I was born with. Neither felt complete on its own. I belonged to both, and to neither. At night, I found myself talking to my biological mother in my thoughts. I asked her why she chose silence. Then I would remember the letters, the fear, the time she lived in. I understood, but understanding does not remove longing. One day I stood in front of a mirror and said my real name out loud. It sounded unfamiliar, but not wrong. I said it again, slower. I did not feel joy, but I did not feel pain either. I felt recognition. Still, something inside me was restless. I felt like there was one more piece of the story I had not faced. My father. The man who raised me. The man who signed the papers. He was gone now, and I would never hear his voice explain his choices. That thought hurt more than I expected. I went back to the box of papers. I searched for anything written by him. I found a single note. Short, careful. He wrote that he hoped one day I would understand. That everything they did was done out of fear, not lack of love. I held that paper to my chest. I finally allowed myself to cry. Crying did not fix anything, but it softened me. And in that softness, I realized something important. This story was not only about a name. It was about trust, about silence, about what families think they must hide to survive. The conflict inside me reached its peak then. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet pressure. I had two choices. I could let this truth define me as a victim, or I could let it define me as someone who finally knew themselves. That choice mattered. I decided to stop hiding from my own story, even the painful parts. I decided to carry both names with honesty, one as history, one as truth. One question remained. Was I ready to fully forgive? Not them, but the past itself. That answer would come later. After the tears came the silence, not the heavy silence of confusion, but a deeper one. The kind that settles after something inside you finally breaks open. I did not feel whole yet, but I felt honest. For days, I moved slowly through my life. I cooked. I cleaned. I smiled when I needed to. But inside, I was rearranging everything I thought I knew. I was no longer angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives direction. What I felt was grief. Grief for a childhood that could have been different. Grief for conversations that never happened. Grief for a truth that waited too long. One afternoon, I took out all the papers again. I laid them on the table in careful order. The adoption forms, the letters, the birth certificate with the name that was truly mine. I read everything from beginning to end. Slowly. Without rushing. This time, I did not look for blame. I looked for understanding. I noticed how often the word fear appeared. Fear of shame. Fear of judgment. Fear of breaking the family apart. No one wrote about what might happen if the truth stayed hidden. That realization hurt more than I expected, because it meant the silence was not about me. It was about them. I was not considered strong enough to know who I was, and that truth stung. That night, I dreamed of my childhood home. I stood in the doorway, holding two names in my hands. One was familiar, worn smooth from use. The other was new, still sharp at the edges. I woke up before I could choose. The next morning, I visited the cemetery again. This time, I went to both graves. First, my biological mother. I stood quietly and spoke to her in my heart. "I understand now," I whispered. "I wish I had known you. But I forgive you." Then I walked to my parents' grave, the people who raised me. I knelt and said, "I know you were afraid, but I wish you had trusted me." Saying those words out loud lifted something heavy from my chest. Forgiveness does not arrive all at once. It comes in small moments. A deep breath, a quiet nod, a soft release. I was not done healing, but I was moving. At home, I started to make space for both stories. I placed my real birth certificate in a folder of its own. Not hidden, not displayed, just honored. I told my children more details, answered their questions honestly. They asked about their grandmother, about my real mother. I told them the truth, without bitterness. I wanted them to grow up knowing that truth does not destroy families, silence does. One evening, my youngest asked, "B, can we call you by your real name?" I paused. It was not a simple question. I smiled gently and said, "You can call me whatever feels right to you." They nodded. And in that moment, I realized something important. My identity was no longer fragile. I began using my real name in small ways, signing it in a private journal, saying it softly when I was alone. It no longer felt foreign. It felt patient, like it had been waiting for me. But the true breaking point came unexpectedly. I was sorting through old photos when I found one I had never seen before. A young woman holding a baby, her face tired, her eyes full of love. On the back, written in faint ink, was my real name. I sat down and held that photo for a long time. That was the moment I fully understood. I had been loved from the very beginning, even if love had taken the wrong shape. I cried then, not from pain, but from release. It was not unwanted. I was protected in the only way they knew how. It's important. That realization did not erase the hurt, but it gave it context. I stopped asking who I could have been. That question no longer served me. I started asking who I wanted to be now. A person who carries truth gently. A person who speaks when silence would harm. A person who trusts others with hard things. The name on my birth certificate was a lie, But my life was not. Every choice I made, every relationship I built, every moment of love, those were real. That night, before sleep, I spoke my real name one last time. Then I spoke the name I had lived with. I did not choose between them. I accepted both. For the first time since discovering the truth, I slept peacefully. Time did not rush after that. It moved the way it always had. Slow, steady. But I was different inside it. I no longer woke up with the weight of confusion pressing on my chest. The truth had settled into me. Not sharply, gently. I had stopped fighting it. Each morning, I made my tea and stood by the window. I watched the light move across the floor. I breathed deeply. I had lived many years without knowing my full story. And yet, I was still here. Still standing. That mattered. I began to notice how often people around me struggled with their own hidden truths. Family secrets. Unspoken regrets. Words left unsaid. We all carry things quietly. Mine had just finally found its voice. I thought about my parents often. Not with bitterness, but with understanding. They lived in a time when fear ruled decisions. When reputation mattered more than honesty. When silence was seen as kindness. They did what they thought was right. That did not make it right, but it made it human. I thought about my biological mother, the woman whose face I only knew from one photograph. I imagined her holding me, naming me, letting me go. I wished I could tell her that I was okay, that her choice did not ruin me, that I lived a full life. One afternoon, I took out a clean piece of paper. I wrote my real name at the top. Below it, I wrote the name I had lived with. I stared at both. Then I wrote a third line. I am more than both of these names. That sentence felt true. I did not change my legal name. I did not feel the need to. The name I lived with had shaped my journey. It had carried me through love, work, and parenthood. But now, I carried my real name in my heart, quietly, with respect. When people asked about my past, I no longer avoided the truth. I did not share everything, but I did not hide either. There is a difference. I told my children one final thing. Whatever you discover about yourselves one day, I said, do not be afraid of it. Truth does not erase love, it deepens it. They listened, they understood. That gave me peace. Sometimes, late at night, I say my real name out loud, not because I need to claim it, but because I want to honor it. It waited a long time for me. The name on my birth certificate was a lie. But it was not meant to hurt me. It was meant to protect, even if it failed in some ways. I no longer let that lie define my life. I let my choices do that. If you are listening to this story and you feel a quiet distance inside yourself, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You are not lost. Sometimes parts of us are hidden until we are strong enough to find them. Truth has a way of waiting patiently. It does not rush. It does not shout. It waits until you are ready. I was ready late, but not too late. I learned who I was. I forgave. I healed. And I carried my story forward with quiet strength. This is not a story about a name. It is a story about belonging. And I finally know that I belong to myself.